I have the honor of introducing Scott Clendaniel. Scott is Chief Data Scientist at Legg Mason in Baltimore. He's also an AI instructor for a little place called Harvard University. You may have heard of it, I'm not sure. But most importantly, Scott is one of the best advocates for data science and analytics that I know. And I know quite a few people. We originally met when we were talking about a nonprofit initiative. I actually run a nonprofit. Shannon's here, Shannon Harlow from Cox Auto. She's part of my nonprofit team as well. And we were talking about how to advance data science and analytics in the nonprofit world. And what particularly struck me is how Scott tends to think about data science and analytics, meaning that he doesn't just see it as a mechanical, technical, non-organic sort of thing. He sees it as having a pulse and being a part of our core. And in some ways, something that we can sort of share and collaborate and become stronger by doing so. So he's one of the best collaborators and advocates that I know of, and I'm thrilled to be able to introduce him. Scott Clendaniel. Thank you. Appreciate you.
Everybody awake? Yes. Fully caffeinated? Awesome. How many of you currently present results of analytics to senior management in some way, shape, or form? Awesome. When I'm going to begin my talk about culture, I'm going to start and see if this resonates with any of you. When I present results to management, I tend to get one of two responses. First response is, hey, I already knew that. Your presentation is worthless, go away. Not good. The second option is, I've never heard of that before. I've never thought of it that way before. Your analysis must be wrong. Please leave my office and go away. Has anyone experienced any part of this dilemma? OK. I'm still looking for the third alternative, and culture may be part of that. So let's go through some stuff. So in terms of the conference that we have here, it's about being data inspired. So why do we care about being data inspired in a culture? This is the one critical question that each of your presentations has to answer. It's not what was the results of the program. It is not what's the results of the model. It's not please show me the report. It's what am I supposed to do with this now? And this is where things tend to break down, because if you're presenting results of a program, what are they going to do with that? Decide whether to do that again or not, right? What are we going to report in terms of our earnings? We've got to know that. But what do we do now based on the results of that? If you keep this single question in mind for your presentation, you're going to help establish the type of culture you want to get impact when you're actually producing those results, as opposed to getting one of those two questions. So why do we care about analytics at all? This is based on research done by Nucleus Research. The typical analytics ROI is between 900 and 1,200%. How many of you already knew that? When it comes to salary negotiation, hold on to this slide, OK? Who said that? OK, so one of the reasons why is many, many years ago, they used to sell everything was a data warehouse. Anybody old enough to remember this? Got to have a data warehouse. It's going to solve all your problems. And they had to come up with a way to be able to justify the expense of a data warehouse. So they said, this is what's going to happen. You're going to spend $90 gazillion on your data warehouse, but you're going to get these amazing insights. And those insights are going to cover the cost. People said, OK, I'll get a data warehouse. And then they needed something else to sell. No, no, no. Data warehouse is not the answer. It's a data mart. You need a customized data mart to be able to come up with the true insights for your specific organization. And the way you're going to pay for that is we're going to come up with these amazing analytics that are going to save you all this money. OK, OK, all right, I guess I need a data mart. What about a BI tool? What type of BI tool are you using? And we went through this over and over and over again. What's the problem with all these solutions? They never tied it to these results. So when you're presenting the results of your information and you want to create the culture that's going to get a positive response, you need to be able to connect what are we going to do now and why are we going to do it, because you need to get these types of results. Everybody with me? Make sense? Mm-hmm. More coffee in the back. Okay, sure. So what is culture? You can't have an early morning presentation without really text-heavy slides because, I think they charge a fee. It's a law or something, I'm not sure. All right, so corporate culture refers to the beliefs and behaviors that determine how a company's employees and management interact and handle outside business transactions. Often, corporate culture is implied, not expressly defined, and develops organically over time. Okay. All right. In other words, if you go to a foreign country, what's one of the first things you need to learn about? It's culture, right? So you don't go through and insult people, right? How many of you ever dated somebody, not recently, but let's say in the past, who was from a different culture, and the first meeting with the parents didn't go so hot? God, you guys are smooth, man, because I ran into this, I'm very impressed. Okay. The culture. What is actually happening behind the scenes? When you're presenting the results of these miraculous analytics projects to senior management, you've got to understand what is the culture you're up against. What is the culture of the department that needs to produce these results, right? What are they up against? What are they being measured by? What is important to them? What is the language that they use? Because I've got a secret for you, folks. Analytics is not about data. It's about people. Because at the end of the day, if what you're presenting does not impact change and it doesn't get implemented, and you have not convinced the people that you're presenting to that what you have is important, it doesn't matter. If you create how many of you are aware of the fact that 85% of predictive analytics models never reach production? That's per Gartner. 85%. Even my batting average is better than 15%, and that should really be telling you something, right? So what are the components that you're up against? What's the purpose of the organization? Who would like to stand up and announce the corporate purpose statement for Cox? Not everybody all at once. Okay. What is the purpose of your organization? What is the purpose of the department you're going to? I'll share a secret with you. If you want to find out what's really important to people, when I was doing consulting, I used to ask the following question. I said, at the end of the year, if you were up for a bonus, what would be the criteria that you were measured against? And people get all shy and they cross, meeting corporate objectives. Okay. So it's like, that isn't really helping me. So then I came up with a secret question that I'm going to share with everyone here this morning. And that is, if you had to guess what your boss's bonus is based on, oh, well, let me tell you, they're up against this and they're up against that, and then there's this other department that they're competing with. Make sure you have a long notepad and a lot of time if you ask that question. But why do you ask it? Because you're trying to get at the core of what's important to people, right? What is the purpose? What are the guiding principles that they're going to operate under? How many of you have a copy of Cox Guiding Principles in your wallet at this moment? Okay, so rules. Let's talk about rules. If you're requesting budget for somebody else, how much budget do they have? What are their guidelines? What are you up against in terms of getting that information to be put into place so you can get the funding to do more research? And finally, there's a concept called corporate citizenship. This is also the concept of the others. Every culture has the inside and the outside. You need to be expressing yourself in such a way so that you can be part of what they're trying to accomplish. You need to be part of the citizenship of that group. You need to be enabling other folks. You need to be an extension of that other group to be able to get results in place. Everybody with me? This is your relative eye test for this morning. First of all, because it's all in dark purple, and second of all, I've picked a font that can only be seen by certain species of dogs from a long distance. But essentially, here are some of the components to check up against. First one is stories. How many of you present all your analytics results in the form of a story? Cool, right? We've got some. Why do you do this? Because the human brain is oriented towards stories. How do most stories start? Yes, that's correct. Once upon a time, right? What's the background? What's the situation that you're up against? What you need to have is a hero for your story, which is usually your internal client. What is the challenge they are up against? What is the quest that they must overcome? What do they have to do to overcome that obstacle? How would it turn out for them? And one of the last two words? Okay, you got once upon a time, kids. Well, how do all stories end? The end, yes. All right? Because the human brain is oriented that way. I have something terribly difficult to tell you. When reading stories to small children, they rarely use pivot tables. I know, it was shocking to me. I myself was really surprised by this, but it turned out to not end well, which might explain why, my son really doesn't ask for stories anymore. Of course, he's also 24 and living in China, but that's a different story, okay? Symbols. What are the symbols of success? What are the trappings of what's going to be important to the organization? What's a good example of this? Tire Hallway out here has amazing history of the Cox presidential run of 1920. Why do they have that up there? Because it's symbols that tie you into the story of your own organization. Those can be powerful things. What are the power structures? How many of you have ever heard of Mintzberg? No, it's not a country. It's the name of a man. Famous business consultant, Henry Mintzberg. He wrote a story that he turned into a very thick book that I had to read for my failed PhD dissertation. Thank you for bringing up such a painful event. Okay, so Mintzberg wrote this book. It was called Power in and Around Organizations. And what he said was, you look on here and it says organizational structures and org charts. Is that really the source of real power? How many of you have tried to get a project through and IT says it can't be done and somehow the project doesn't get done? Wow, because it's happened to me. What about you can't get budget for your project? Well, who's controlling the purse strings? Who are the sources of power in an organization is usually based on what do they have control on? What are the resources that they can either issue or not issue, right? So you need to understand what are your internal clients up against. You're here to help your internal clients, otherwise analytics is useless. And you might as well be sitting in your cubicle playing guitar for all the amount of difference. By the way, I don't recommend the guitar thing. Not that anything ever happened to me because of that, but I'm just sharing that story, okay? You with me? Right. So why culture? Determines how people communicate, determines how people interact, determines how people relate to one another, what is appropriate behavior, how power and status are allocated, and guides day-to-day working relationships. What do we say analytics is really about? People, right? Any of these things tend to resonate with you on how to interact with people? I hope they do. Because basically, if people are the key to you being successful or not, and culture determines the rules of how to work with other people, culture becomes really important in you getting your job done. Number two, who knows Peter Drucker? Personally? Who's read Peter Drucker? All right. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. How many of you have come up with an amazing strategic plan and had it crash and burn? You guys are amazing. You know, nothing bad ever happens to the people of Cox. You know, this is fantastic. I'm starting to feel a little insecure up here because these things have happened to me. Because I've come up with strategies that I thought were really great and then found out that they completely violate what the internal organization wants to do. How many of you have ever had the experience where somebody says, we need to have change in this organization? I hear chuckling, so I know some of you know this is right. And then how many of you turn around and go, all right, they really want change. I'm going to come up with awesome change. I'm going to be an agent of change. And then you present it to the boss and it's like, well, this requires that I change. No, 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 no. The change I'm talking about is to get other people to do it my way. Right? Doesn't work really well. Right? So the internal culture can destroy your strategy, or it can make your strategy come to fruition. That's why it's important. Now, this is kind of a serious drab slide, black and white. So I was trying to come up with something a little happier for earlier in the morning. How many of you are old enough to remember Pac-Man? Yes. How about Ms. Pac-Man? Donkey? No, okay. All right, so on here we've got a whole bunch of our little, anybody remember what the little guys who are being eaten were called? Ghosts? You guys are good. Growth, change, performance, innovation, execution. How many of you have been in a meeting where one of those things was mentioned? How many of you have also found out that maybe it didn't get full implementation afterwards? It might be because you're not fixing for culture as you go through and present your results. I actually like the next one even more than this one, but it's just me. How many of you worked on a strategic plan for your group within the past 2 years? Okay. How many of you worked on a culture plan? Last 2 years. There are some. Cool. You must adapt into your strategy if you're going to get anything done. Anybody know what this is?
Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Fantastic. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. By the way, trivia, Abraham Maslow was actually born on April Fool's Day. That has nothing to do with the presentation, just thought I'd toss that out there. All right. Anyone heard the expression, if the only thing you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail? Also Abraham Maslow. All right, so in his hierarchy of needs, the basic concept is pretty simple. You've got fundamental needs at the bottom of the pyramid. You must meet the fundamental needs of the level below before you go to the level above. All right, so at the base of this, you need to have food, water, shelter. Second, you need to have safety. Third, belonging and love needs. Fourth, esteem needs, cognitive needs, aesthetic needs, self-actualization, and here's also trivia, which I'm sure is going to help you pick up members of the opposite sex in bars. Did you know there's actually a higher level in Maslow's hierarchy of need called transcendence? It didn't work for me. But for you guys, it might work out. All right, so if something's towards the bottom, how important is it? Very. If it's towards the top, you need to make sure the bottom is filled first. So we're going to talk about safety needs. What on earth is he talking about? Where is he going with this presentation? Because I'm about to show you where analytics violates the hierarchy of needs and why some of your projects may not be as successful as you want them to be. Data could use some better role models. Open the pod bay doors, Hal. I'm afraid I can't do that, Dave. No, that wasn't very good. All right, but anyhow, you got the HAL 9000, you got the Terminator. How many saw iRobot? How many thought there were about like 300 times too many robots in that movie? Yeah, you give somebody a big special effects budget and watch out. But anyhow, you're trying to go to another area of the organization who may not be data inspired. And you're saying, I've got all this data. This may be what they're thinking of if you're telling them, oh, I have data that's going to help you. All right? This is what they may be thinking of. But more importantly, what about if your data proves that I did my job wrong? What if your data shows that I made the wrong decision? What if your data is in fundamental disagreement with my fundamental beliefs of how the organization works? Right? Also, if you have any resource or technology that someone else does not have, that can be very threatening to people. So that's one of the reasons why I really love that they talked about this conference being data inspired, because you need to be really careful how you choose your terms. How I see math word, how many had math word problems in school? If you have 4 pencils and I have 7 apples, how many pancakes will fit on the roof? Purple, because aliens don't wear hats. That's what word problems looked like to me when I was in school. What does this have to do with a data-inspired culture? This is what you're up against. When you're presenting results to someone and it seems like a foreign language to them, they have no idea what you're talking about. And yet you're coming to them and saying, you're supposed to make a change. You're supposed to be doing something different than you're doing before. When I tell you what to do now, it's based on something like this. What do people respond to in marketing? People that they know, people that they like, and people that they trust, right? If I don't know what you're talking about, you're dead in the water before you hit step 2. Apparently, I can operate a clicker, but not a name badge. So interesting. OK. Second reason why this is hard. Data experts don't always make things easier. Rule number 1, real programmers don't document their code. How many of you have heard this? It's self-explanatory. Well-written code explains itself. That's not the code I tend to read. Right? 2, if it was really hard to write, it should be really hard to read. Rule number 3, if it was supposed to be easy to understand, we wouldn't be calling it code. Right? So when you're trying to explain to somebody, by the way, I have actually been in analytical presentations where they will put the code in the presentation. In the step 4 subroutine, we find by taking this, just stop. Just please. If it's really important to you, I'll give you a secret. Have you ever been in a conversation with somebody where you got to do a group presentation and they want something in there and you think this is completely useless? Appendix. Put it in the appendix. If they feel it really needs to be there, someone's going to ask a question about it, and you're in the presentation, you can then go in and say, hey, well, we've got it here, and we can cover it there. All right? Don't stick it in the front and walk people through code in a management presentation. I'm not talking about code reviews. I'm talking about presentations to management. Enable people, not data. When you tell somebody that you're going to have a data-driven culture, in their heads, they're picturing being the marionette. People do not like to give up control. And yet, in some way, although you're not using those words, that's what they are perceiving that you are saying. Data explanations aren't very explanatory. How do you pronounce the word in all bold? Tuple or tuple. Do you know that officially there is no official way to pronounce that word? Websters cannot even decide how to pronounce a 5-letter, 2-syllable word. But that's really cleared up. Right? A tuple is a sequence of immutable Python. What are you talking about? Who uses the word immutable? How many of you who aren't programmers have used the word immutable in the past month? If anyone raised their hands, I would say they were fibbing, but all right. That's the definition. If you were presenting information in presentations like this, you're going to have a problem. Everybody with me? And notice everything else, a list, a set, a dictionary. By the way, what are the 2 words with the most definitions in the Oxford Dictionary? They're both 3 letters. Set and run. What are the 2 words that we talk about in code most often? Well, pretty often are set and run. So what happens, unfortunately, is you say set, they hear set, and they're doing this, and inside they're going, which? All right. I believe set has 32 distinct definitions. Be careful when you're explaining stuff, because it makes perfect sense to you. It is not their first language. You have to start with where your audience is and come to them. Stop trying to take your audience and bringing them to you. It's about people. Recommendations. All right, great. So it's a mess, it's a pain, it's hard. Well, what am I supposed to do about this? All right, so now it's time for my game show host voice. If you pay careful attention today, we may be able to save your organization up to $20,000 a year per employee. Let's look at the math. Rule number 1, stop calling it data-driven, please. I'll buy you soda. People don't want to be driven. People want to drive. And they certainly don't want to be driven by something they don't understand and don't like very much. With me? Data-inspired, I think, is a great term, which we're using for the conference, but it's an important idea. Insights-enabled data says that I'm not very good at this game, but data-driven is definitely a no-no. Less push, more pull. Who of you works with marketing at all? A couple of you. What is pull or demand marketing? Basically, it's the idea to stop trying to sell people and stop trying to push out email communications and stop trying to push out advertising for the sake of advertising. Try and get customers to come to you. So this is where the big push for content marketing came from. Have them come to you, ask questions for them. Stop trying to go to different departments and saying, this is how you should do your job. How many of you really love when someone comes into your office and says, hey, I think you're doing it wrong. I've got a better idea. It doesn't go very well. Also, the equivalent, somebody meets somebody in a bar for the first time, and the first question is, will you marry me? It didn't work for me. But you know, you need to sort of establish a relationship and find out what their needs are and see if this is really going to make sense, right? So you want the demand for analytics and insights to come on the pull side. You don't want to be on the push side. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. Identify goals and guardrails first. And yes, I know I can't count for the R1, R2, R3. Shh, but we're going to pretend that I numbered them right. People do not want a 1/4-inch drill bit. They want a 1/4-inch hole. When you are presenting something to an internal client, think about whether you're selling the hole or the drill bit. They want the problem solved. They don't want to know that you used a convolutional neural network. I hate to break it to you, but they really don't. They want the problem solved. All right. Also, how many of you in the audience, when you are first assigned an analytical project, ask, what is the budget? What is the time frame? What's the implementation strategy? How are we going to measure the results? All 4 of those. You're going to make me cry. OK, those are important things to be asking, because those are the guardrails. How many of you have ever created a model and then have the production department say, we don't use that language, we can't use your code? Right? Remember, I said in the beginning, 85% of analytics projects do not get implemented. Why is that? This is part of the reason, because people haven't laid out up front. I went to the Gartner Data and Analytics Conference in March in Orlando, and I just asked the question, how many of you ask for what the budget is going to be for the project before you start? 250 people in the room with me, 4 hands went up. 4. And that conference is expensive, man. Lovely conference. Highly recommend everybody go, but really expensive. So if you don't know what the budget is, you don't know what the time frame is, how are you possibly going to meet those objectives? You're going to end up in the bucket with the 85% of the people who don't get their projects implemented. Everybody with me? I'm going to ask you to start presenting results using the fire alarm rule. Anybody know the fire alarm rule for presentations? You have finally gotten senior management together for this really drastically important presentation. They've got very difficult schedules. It's been a real pain in the neck. 2 minutes into your presentation, the fire alarm goes off. Everybody's got to evacuate the building. You can't get them back on the calendar for another 90 days to all be in the same place at the same time. What have you accomplished in that meeting? Probably not a whole lot. I don't like to tell other people how to do presentations, but the executive summary, 1 page. Repeat with me. 1 page. Come on, one more time. What? God, come on, guys. Why? Because if everything else in your what if there was an actual fire and everything in your presentation burned except that one page? Would there be enough information on that page on what is the point of why you set up the meeting in the first place? If not, you need to rethink how you're presenting results. This is a cultural issue. This isn't a data issue. It is a people issue. Everybody with me? All right. Senior management. How many of you had someone come to them and say, we need a model? How many have also, the next question in your head is, a model is not the answer. Why is he asking for a model? All right, the word model and the word magic are both 5-letter words that begin with the letter M. They're not the same thing. I was once asked to bid on a consulting job, and the job was this. We want you to build a predictive model on launching a new product in Italy. Oh, that sounds like an interesting project. Okay. How many other projects have you had where you've launched a product in Italy? None. How many other projects have you had where you've launched a new product in the EU? None. What data do you have on projects that you've launched in the US? No. Well, we didn't keep that. That was previous management. It was a different leadership structure. OK, so what data do you really want me to be using? Well, that's your job. You're the data scientist. I didn't accept that contract. Here's the scarier part. Somebody else did. I don't know who it was, but I have a feeling that did not end well. Just because you're building a model does not mean that miracles are going to come out the other side. People need to understand that if you have a model, what is the main purpose of a model? It's to reduce uncertainty, right? It's not saying I guarantee this person is going to respond to the email. It's that this person is more likely than somebody else, right? You've got to make sure that you are not setting the expectations in a place where your model can't possibly deliver. Good? How many of you would like to send, let's try that again. How many of you would like to save $15,000 on a piece of software? I would. Drag and drop, data science, predictive analytics, artificial intelligence. Typical cost for a single license of software such as and runs about $15,000 a seat. This is free. It's called Orange Data Mining. How many of you know Weka? W-E-K-A. Also free. Also offers your drag and drop interface. You can get a perfectly serviceable model out of either one of those programs using drag and drop without writing a single line of Python. But you can export the final model in Python to be run. Now, the graphics look like they came out of, like a 1993 Angel Fire website. I will admit that, OK? But it is completely serviceable, and I can build predictive models out of this. If you're just testing a project, test it here first before you go out and say, I've got to buy something really expensive. You with me? How many of you use Anaconda in some way, shape, or form? How many of you know what Anaconda is? How many of you are aware that Orange is embedded in Anaconda? So if you already have Anaconda, you already have Orange. Now check with all your internal folks about compliance and technology and all this kind of stuff. Please don't get me in trouble. But this is a good way to start and get off the ground very quickly. Good? How would you like to save $2,500 per employee on training? Go to the website in the link. It has complete video-based training instruction for all sorts of different projects. All of them are free. Are they the greatest training that's ever been created? No. But they'll get you a lot further than where you are right now. All right. $400 per month on data science books. If you go to this link, included right here, there are 100 complete data science books that have been written in the past 5 years for free, online, in PDF. You can download them this morning and have all those references without trying to shell out the bucks for all those projects. Right? So those are a bunch of actionable skills that you can do right now. But what I really wanted to do is to find out what you wanted to know about and what challenges you're facing and how I can help any of you. So I'd like to open up the floor to questions for the last 10 minutes of this. Not everyone all at once. I'm going to tell jokes if I don't get questions. Okay, so 2 data scientists are about to be executed.
Okay, somebody please ask a question before he tells jokes. I'll let you finish your joke, but just real quickly, there are 2 people in the back that are floating the mic, and this is a very wide room. So just raise your hand when you're ready, and they will bring the mic to you. Please proceed with incredibly funny joke.
I only know one. So if you see this presentation, if I ever ask this question again, for the love of God, please ask a question, because you're going to have to hear the same one. Yes?
Quick question. Will you be sharing this presentation with the audience?
Yes, I already have. I've already shared it with folks here. So how are wonderfully smart people at Cox, how are we going to share the presentation with folks? I'll tell you what, in the meantime, my email address is Clendaniel, which is my last name from the program, @legmason.com. I'll be happy to send you one. You're welcome.
Question for you. So tell us about the culture at Legg Mason and kind of some of the challenges or changes that your company's gone through.
Sure. I come from the school of the painfully direct. It's this honesty thing. If you send your kids to Scouts, watch out, because when they say always tell the truth, sometimes the kids actually pick up on that, and I'm one of those. I have worked a lot of organizations, and the cultures have not been good. There's been a lot of issues of, no, it's my data, you can't use it. No, I'm not going to use your algorithm because our department doesn't do that. No, I'm not going to work with you on this project because I don't want to be seen as an idiot that I didn't think of this on my own. The good news is that none of those problems have happened at Legg Mason. It's a very collaborative culture. It's probably the nicest group of people I've worked with. So what's the downside? They haven't done a whole lot of AI projects in the past, so some of this is new to some groups. So what I did to sort of get past that was I offered free training on AI and introduction to machine learning. Now here's the kicker. We have a total of about 1,000, 1,100 folks. Anyone want to guess how many people came to all 4 sessions of the training? 200. And what levels were they? They were all levels of the organization, including 2 administrative assistants, one of whom is now going through our full analytics track through University of Maryland. So that was a way to sort of break down that piece and try to reach out to folks. Also, we use what's called a hub and spoke model, where I try and enable other groups to do their own data science, as opposed to saying, you know, I am the Raja of data science and you must come to me for my wisdom and blessings. Those 2 things have been very helpful. So that's how we got around that. Next question. Yes?
What are some ways to communicate major transformational changes? Let's say an organization is going one way, and you're directing them or seeing things that suggest you should go in a different way. How do you go about doing that?
So the question is, what are ways to introduce major organizational change where the organization might be going one way and you want it to go a different way? 2 things that I'll point out to that. 1, you need an executive sponsor. Let's just be honest. If you don't have someone towards the top who is supporting you, your first job is to convince someone at the top to be supporting you. Because if it doesn't come from a major initiative, it's not going to happen. Number 2, if it does not impact people's performance reviews, compensation, or bonus, it ain't going to happen for major cultural change. I'm not talking about using a different approach. I'm not talking about adopting a model, but your question was about fundamental changes in direction. It's got to come from the top, and it's got to impact people's career paths. Or the reality is it's very unlikely to change. Unless you can get, remember we talked push versus pull? The best way to get salespeople and other organizations I've found to start using a model is find one salesperson to use the model. and watch their commissions go up. You will have salespeople beating down your door to be able to use that technology if it's proven to work. And that's completely legitimate. You know, prove to me that this is going to work before you're going to do it. Make sure you have a really rigorous testing plan before you do any of this stuff, so that at the end of the project, they don't come to you and say, oh, this is neat, but I want you to test it some more. Take care of that before you present it in the first place. And also, don't throw clickers. That's another really good piece of advice. Any other questions?
How do you explain difficult technical concepts to business leaders without seeming condescending or coming across as if you're trying to dumb something down?
Good question. So the question is, how do you present very technical information to senior leaders? First of all, I try not to. And what I mean by that is, I have found that in many cases, people only care for the really technical information if they don't believe what you presented. I have found that most senior executives do not give a rat's backside about which algorithm I chose or which transformation I used, unless they're asking for me to prove that my results were correct. So one of the things I focus on is, what was the problem, what were the results, and how do I prove that this works? If you take care of those, that takes a lot of those questions away. In terms of the technical pieces, what I usually do is I set up a separate meeting with that person. If I have someone who consistently has those questions, I present all the material to them in a one-on-one before I have the big meeting. Because I'm not saying the questions aren't legitimate. They are, and they need to be answered. But they don't necessarily need to be answered while everyone else is falling asleep on the table. Also, the appendix thing. I know it sounds silly. I get it. I really do. Try it a couple times, so that if it comes up, you can either talk to them afterwards or you can answer the question in that session. But don't put it in front of the presentation. They don't care. They want to know. They want to feel safe. Think of Maslow. I know it seems silly in a data presentation to be talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But if you start from the place you're dealing with people don't like to be embarrassed. They don't like to feel stupid. You know, self-esteem is pretty important. So am I answering your question? Okay.
I'd like to know, so what is your view on how important is it for the organizations to have a data strategy? I guess a formal data strategy. So earlier we heard from the Cox Auto, you know, they have formally appointed a chief strategy officer, a chief data officer. How important, in your view, is for organizations to have that? And if they don't have it, what's the guidance? How should they proceed on making the data decisions? How much investments they put in on the day-to-day tasks? You know, whatever business they're carrying operationally.
Well, first of all, I would probably defer to your CDO to answer that question. But in general, let's pretend it was a different organization. Let's pretend it's not Cox. It is important to have a data strategy that is simple enough for people to all get on the same page to start with. Like, what data are we going to look at? How much data do we need? By the way, how many of you report on statistical significance of your results in presentations? Unless you have an executive asking for it, I'm going to suggest you stop. Here's why. Matter of fact, how many of you saw the article that there are now 800 statistical organizations that are suggesting you stop using statistical significance? You know why? Because if you use big data, everything looks statistically significant. Statistical significance was designed on how many rolls of a dice is sufficient to be able to predict the odds in gambling. That's where it came from. So it's really helpful if you've only got 17 records or you've got 170 records. When you've got a bazillion terabytes of data, just stop, because everything's going to look statistically significant. So I tend to not do that. Instead, the data strategy needs to cover how much information is enough to start. Also, what I usually do is I start with a learning plan. What do we want to know? Then how would we implement it if we had the answer? Get that figured out. How much data are we going to use? Those type of things are really important for decision making. In terms of, that's where I would start if I was consulting another organization. If you try and boil the ocean and have the strategy of every data element and every data store in the organization from day one, they tend to die horrible deaths. Okay, so the 2 data scientists are about to be executed. The first one comes up and says, I would like to announce my universal theory, because I get a last request, to explain how important a data-inspired strategy is and how to use my analysis to further those results. And the second data scientist says, can I be shot first? All right, so that's the end. Thank you all very much. I'll be around for a couple minutes afterwards.